You may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, obviously, when you were homeschooled, then you were subject to these standardized tests that how the organization started out. So how do you feel that affected you in later life learning with your college and at school?
Madam Chair, Representative Heller. Very, very good question, because a lot of people ask me, so how did you transition from homeschool to university? Because, I mean, admittedly, it was a completely different situation. I was familiar with bubble sheets because I had to take standardized tests, but otherwise, you know, the entire concept of sitting down in a mega classroom and having a teacher spoon feed you the information, I just drove me insane for probably the first semester or so. Now, I find it very interesting to notice that as my education progressed, the methods of assessment changed as my education became more and more specialized. You know, whereas in by virtue of convenience, really, I mean, if you have 1,000 students that all have to take freshman chemistry, then obviously you can't just have, you know, 5 students per. The teacher-student ratio is a huge controversial issue. That changed to the point when I was in my doctoral program that in our professional rotations and things, internal medicine, everything else, it was almost one-on-one. It was in round situations. You know, you had your treatment plans and diagnostic strategies completely torn apart by people. And I say all that to directly relate back to how the standardized achievement tests affected me. Thankfully, we had a very strong educational program that, in my homeschool experience, that really didn't make the test a huge deal for me. But I definitely saw that once I took the SAT and I started taking standardized achievement tests in college, you know, especially with respect to the multiple choice fill-in-the-blank style bubble sheet exams that we're talking about, I really saw for myself how it impacts the way you think about the information you're learning. We often talked about losing it all after an exam. I mean, cram it all in. That's not when the education occurred. I didn't really learn. I mean, we had to take all these extensive anatomy classes and stuff, but we didn't really learn that until we were in surgery with somebody over top of us, working over us and explaining things. So, I guess to give you I'm kind of rambling here, so to bring this back to the specific issue, I felt like the standardized achievement tests did not fit with our program. I mean, I can't say personally that they were inherently detrimental to us. But after what I've experienced now in becoming a veterinarian, it's so clear to me. I mean, being able to focus the way you train your children to think on the deep, very complicated methods of thinking that actually characterize success in the real world, that's just so huge to me. I want to give my children that experience and not distract them with this other system that rewards a much more superficial means of thinking about information.
Ben, I have to take it a step further because I don't think you answered her question.
Okay.
Because that was one of the questions that I had written down as well.
Okay.
Standardized tests are a way of higher education. I mean, that is a form of testing in higher education. Standardized tests are a form of measuring your competence and your education when it comes to becoming a doctor. You have to take the MCAT. If you want to get into law school, you have to take the LSAT. So, and I don't know what you have to take in order to become a veterinarian, but I'm most familiar with those 2 tests. And they're standardized tests. And kids struggle with some standardized tests, and especially standardized tests that are high stakes tests. So really her question is, you know, number 1, did it help you or not help you when it came to taking a standardized test? And, you know, is it important to at least have kids have the knowledge and understanding of a standardized test before they get to college and before they realize that there are high stakes tests that they have to take?
Thank you for that clarification, Madam Chair. The only way I can answer that directly really gets into your original thing of how do you become a veterinarian. In order to practice, I had to pass the National Board exam. That is a norm reference test. without speaking terribly detrimentally of my classmates, there was a wide diversity of preparation for practice. Even though we all passed that test, the true impact, the true things that impacted whether or not we were successful had nothing to do with the outcome of that test. So going back to the whether or not, I think your question was to, correct me if I'm wrong, is it important for students to take these standardized achievement tests?
It's not necessarily to take them,
Okay.
and, you know, because you know what, and you know, really, you probably don't even have to bother to answer. We're kind of at that point, but I believe you when you say you probably are a very good veterinarian, and it probably had nothing to do with the knowledge that you had on a standardized test. The problem is, and you can love them, you can hate them. The issue is that standardized tests are here and they're here to stay. And they are measuring a component of your knowledge at a place and time. And so you may be the best physician ever, but you struggled on your MCAT. You may be the best attorney ever, but you struggled on that LSAT. And so that's the question I'm asking is, does it help to have had a standardized test in preparation to take high stakes standardized tests in the future? And it's really a yes or a no. I mean, really, that's
Sure. Madam Chair, the answer would be no.
Okay. Okay. Representative Hunsker and then Representative Rust.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Stegman, one of our concerns is that some homeschool parents may not be responsible. And probably that's the purpose of monitoring and testing, is to help that situation so that there would be a minimum number of kids that wouldn't fall through the cracks. So my question is, what specific steps is your organization doing to help minimize the number of families that are not responsible? Because obviously there are some, and those kids are not getting the education that they should have. So do you have something in place to reach out to those families to cut that number down?
Madam Chair, Representative Hunsker, we have several things in place currently and multiple things in development. The first thing is the local support group, because this gets really down to just being a good neighbor. We have a mutual responsibility to each other, both in the context of our churches as well as in these homeschool support groups, even if you're not part of a church. And so that exists. The support group structure is really all about that, of helping parents to do the best job they can for their kids. Where that expands to cover people that are irresponsible or whatever you want to call them, is that we're developing various types of mentor matching programs and statewide situations that hopefully will be able to intersect with local public schools and state officials as well, to be able to specifically address those situations when they arise. Because those situations, they don't require a standardized achievement test or a monitoring situation to identify them. When there's a family in the community that is having those types of issues, unfortunately or fortunately, they get reported. I mean, that's happened in Pembina County, that's happened in multiple situations, sometimes unfairly. But I guess that's what I would say. We have the support groups in place, and we're developing systems that hopefully will be able to cooperate with our existing public school officials.
Representative Rust.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Stegman. On page 2 of the bill, when it talks about standardized tests, it states that the requirement does not apply if the parent has a philosophical, moral, or religious objection. And when I think of the words philosophical, moral, or religious, probably covers them all. I mean, I can't think of many other than somebody says they don't want to do it because they just don't want to do it. I'm kind of wondering if those words, philosophical, moral, or religious, are even necessary, just if you have an objection. Do you have an opinion on
that? Chairman Couch, Representative Russ, yes, I do. It's true. From a legal perspective, it does not matter what your motivation is for not wanting to administer the test. That was the reason why we proposed the parental qualifications as an alternative, because it was terminology that we were already familiar with. It was a system that we're already familiar with. Our legal counsel also mentioned that fact. We included it because we want to establish for the committee, for legislators, for posterity, that this is what's at stake. It's not just that we think that parental qualifications are good. It's that there are other ways of assessing compliance with the state law than standardized achievement tests.
You may continue.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would assume that what would happen is maybe on the statement of intent that it's merely a check, right? I mean, I have a philosophical, moral, or a religious objection, and you just check it off. You don't have to give a particular reason. Is that the way you see it being done?
Madam Chair, Representative Russ, that's exactly right. I'm sorry.
You may, okay, go ahead.
In the years that the standardized tests would be required, accompanying the statement of intent would be proof of compliance with those parental qualifications.
You may continue.
I just have one more question. If this bill were passed, given a due pass by this committee and passed by the legislature, what would that do on moving us from a red state? Where would that put us? I think some of my compadres would like to go to a blue state, but I don't see that color on there, so where would it take it to?
Sure. Madam Chair, Representative Rust, the information that I have is that it would move us to be consistent with most of the other states around us. I believe it would be gold, and I have to ask Dr. Bartlett about that. Are we orange? Sorry, we're orange. So we'd be the same as Minnesota, Iowa, South Dakota, most of the other states that share a similar demographic to us.
Thank you.
And let's go back to the association question. What is the percentage of homeschool parents that belong to the association? Do you know what the percentage is?
Sure. Madam Chair, the answer to your question is that we don't know for sure. We assume a pretty high percentage. We don't have any kind of access to the numbers of statements of intent that are collected by the state. It would be interesting to compare those numbers.
Well, and I've been told that there are two reasons why parents don't belong to the association. One is that there are parents that homeschool their children not for religious purposes and believe that this organization is religious based, and that's in your mission statement, and that's part of the reason. And then the other reason is the individuals that Representative Hunsker is talking about is that their reasons for homeschooling are maybe not the appropriate reasons for homeschooling their children, and that some of those children may be in situations where it's just not a good family situation, and they don't want that brought to light in the public. And by joining this organization, that probably would come out. So is that a fair assessment from what I've been told?
Madam Chair, yes, that's a very fair assessment. The issue of the irresponsible parents is a really thorny one because, how do you characterize them? Are they homeschoolers? Are they not? I think we have to be very careful to understand the difference between abuse and unintentional educational neglect. Because, we've been making the point all along that successful schools depend on successful families. And our success in North Dakota is largely because of our families. And so, it's kind of inappropriate to characterize all those together. Somebody that just needs help for a specific instructional challenge or a learning challenge, something specific to the child or specific to their situation, that's totally different than somebody that is misusing our home school law to camouflage mistreatment of children. And unfortunately, I don't think our law has ever provided protection for those people.
No, it's not, and it doesn't, but it's also being used for those students that are unruly in school, and parents are just saying, rather than coping with law enforcement and the teachers, we're just going to say we're homeschooling them and pulling them out at age 12, 13, 14, and then letting them just go when they're 16.